All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, the land of plaid and coffee. So let me actually move my coffee a little bit before I spill it all over the place here. All right, here's the deal. If you haven't gotten any yet, get some Squatch Coffee. Sasquatch Coffee Company, get on over there. Also, just wanted to give a couple shouts out again, or a few shouts out. First and foremost, to you, the listener. I'm going to tell you this right now. I love you guys. Just love the comments that you guys leave and everything on the YouTube channel, and would absolutely love it if you can get over there to the website, check it out, see what's going on there as well. But I do want to say thank you so very much for all of the support, and I am working my tail off here, putting these reports and rumors and things that I hear out here and are shared with me, and turning them into those campfire like stories for you. And so I just really truly appreciate you. Also, I wanted to say real quick, big shout out there to Bigfoot's Wilderness out there with Mike, and also with Mr. Jevning over at Devil Creek, Devil's Creek, and also wanted to let you guys know that Monster X Radio is going to be upping their game here pretty soon, which is going to be really, really awesome. As a matter of fact, they're going to start bringing a lot of new, really awesome stuff, and it's going to be great. I'm actually a huge fan of Monster X Radio. I'm really, really loving some of the things that they said they're going to have going on here, going into the next year, the new year. So it's going to be really awesome if you get over there to Monster X Radio. So with that, once again, real quick, to you. Merry Christmas. May the Lord richly bless you in this new year, period. Okay, that is my prayer going out for you guys, that you have a wonderful and a Merry Christmas and a blessed new year. Let's get on with today's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story, The Girl Who Played Hide and Seek with Bigfoot. I was lost in the woods. The woods were darker now, and that feeling of dread suddenly came over me. I finally realized I was not playing hide and seek with my older brother. I was lost, and something, and not my brother, led me deeper into the forest. I can't tell you how afraid I felt when I believed I knew I was lost, and realized I was playing hide and seek with a monster, a Bigfoot in fact. At that moment, I just wanted my mother. Heck, I would have taken my big and always teasing me brother for that matter. I was lost, and I knew I was in danger. Hide and seek with Bigfoot. It was morning, and it had snowed, just a dusting. However, in Seattle, Washington, it usually just rains. The snow is usually saved for the mountains that hedge us in between them and the sea. But it was to be a great day. We would be heading out for the weekend and staying at my grandparents' house just outside of Snoqualmie, between there and Ellisville, to be exact. The weekend's goal was to get our Christmas tree, and one for my grandmother and grandfather, as they were getting older and could not get one for themselves. None of us liked the fake Christmas trees back then, and this was the early 80s, literally 1982. And the tree selection back then was ridiculous. Besides, heading out for a day in the mountains, seeking out that perfect tree is all about family, fun, and the tree too. It was a family tradition that, even after my encounter with this, thing, we kept up and continued with through the years, and passed it on to the next generation of our family. However, I always warned them to be careful out there, and for a good reason. There is something out there, something some call myth or fable, and a legend made up by peoples of the region, perhaps. But it is real, and I don't think they are all that cuddly little teddy bears either. Not this one, at least. The trip. I was 9 years old at the time, and my attitude, my mother would remind me, was that of a teenager. I know what she meant now that I have raised my own kids. Like they say, when you are a mom or dad, you'll understand. And oh boy, did I, and I still do. But I was a bit of a handful, to be honest. I was not an only child either. My brother Jacob was actually a teenager at the time, 13 years old to be exact, and helped Mom raise me, I suppose. See, a few years earlier, I was in a car wreck, and a bad one. I was left in the hospital for nearly a week, recovering from a broken arm, concussion, and 2 cracked ribs. I was going to be fine. Recovery of 100% was my diagnosis. But my father was not. He died. Almost instantly. A drunk driver hit us almost head on. My father, back then when we did not have to wear seat belts, had one on anyway. But still, the impact was so hard, he hit his head so hard, in fact, that the brain trauma was too much. And barely 2 hours in the hospital. After that, he had passed away. I was 6. My brother was 10. My mother was a young mom, and at that moment made a widow at the age of 32. It was a sad time. For a whole year, she seemed to be out of sorts about everything. We even stopped going to church for that entire year. But eventually, something happened. Life moved on. We headed back to church, attended the annual Christmas tree expedition with my grandparents that next year, and things got back to normal, for the most part. That trip to get that Christmas tree that year was the spark, I think, that set the fire in my mother to move on with life. Not to forget, but to move on and live life. Besides, my dad would have wanted her to. And I think that is what her parents and my dad's parents told her. This trip, the one today we were going to go on, was going to be another life-altering moment for all of us. As I said, it was morning, and we were heading out to my grandparents' house. It was early, and a dusting of snow had blanketed the entire Seattle and outer areas in the wee hours of the morning. It was beautiful, everything covered in white and green instead of gray. All the way out to their house, I looked out at the mountains, the trees, and even some of the open land that contained farms. All was covered in white. It was cold, too. Really cold. Even for that time of the year, 3 weeks before Christmas. We had a cold front. My mom called it falling upon us from the north, coming down from Alaska, and it was to stay with us all week. The thought of more snow made me really happy, as it made the whole Christmas tree hunt more, well, I guess Christmassy, if you will. Finally, we made it, and we were greeted with a cup of hot cocoa with the iconic candy cane sticking out of it, the smell of sugar cookies, and something else in the air. Oh yeah, the smell of pine, but the spray kind. The day was spent visiting and playing around the property with my brother, who had to be a jerk here and there, smacking me upside the head with snowballs mixed with dirt. He was a real pain sometimes. I will admit, it was good to have that normality in my life, as I would learn soon enough. The rest of the day and evening consisted of helping Grandma cook and bake. As my brother helped Grandpa string up a few more lights around the house he could not have done on his own otherwise. They always went all the way, and even over the top for Christmas, I remember. Outside of the grove. Breakfast was early and hot. Chocolate chip pancakes with a hint of peppermint, some bacon and eggs were served up. We were full and ready to hit the road in no time. My grandparents would ride with us, but they would not be wandering around seeking out a tree. That would be for the 3 of us. However, they would scan the area for pine boughs they could use to make a few wreaths for the church and their longtime neighbors and friends, Annie and her husband Thomas, who were both elderly as well, and not able to get out as much anymore either. We would be hitting an old hunting area up and out of Ernie's Grove. and I mean up and out of the little town. Well, a farming community was what it was back then. We would head pretty high up into the mountains that seemed like their own mountain range that skirted the entire area. They, too, were covered in white and even more, which made me smile more, knowing it would be a day of family, snow, fun, and Christmas trees. It was truly a picturesque morning, made to be placed in a frame on a wall. We found the area, an open area that seemed like a kind of turnabout where we would park the car. My grandfather noted how much the forest had changed and had taken over much of the turnabout that he said had been a clear cut not a couple of decades before. This was BLM land, and the only cutting down of trees allowed there was the kind we were doing. Again, we had some hot cocoa. I drank mine as I walked back and forth along the side of the old dirt road in the fresh snow. I noticed other tracks. So did my brother. Mostly deer, but there was one set of tracks, big ones too, but the melt around them erased any clue to what it might be. My grandfather's interest was, of course, piqued, and taking a slow look at them, he swore they were elk with just a bunch of melt around them. Funny, though, I recall he did not have a face that seemed all that convinced of his best guess. I think he was wrong, dead wrong. Later, he and I would know how wrong he was. At first, we all walked to the edge of the old logging road. My grandfather would tell us that it was many years before. It was a logging road many years before. My brother and I were on one side, my mom and grandparents on the other. We scanned for the perfect tree and all the perfect trees that were already there. This part of the state is still flush with thick forest, and I mean Pacific Northwest thick. You could barely see 20 or 30 yards into the tree line and high shrubs. Only when you enter does it get lighter, as I would come to learn moments later. We came to the end of the road, about a quarter of a mile or so. We walked it until it dead-ended. From there, we decided to walk just inside the tree line itself. Again, my brother and I were on the one side of the old road, my mother and grandparents on the other. As I said, my grandparents, they couldn't go off-road. Of course, my mother warned my brother sternly about keeping an eye on me and not letting me out of his sight. He promised her he would, but he always did that, yet ignored it. It was his idea to play a bit of hide and seek, after all. Hide and seek with Bigfoot? It all started with him hiding, and he did a good job of it. By the time I counted to 25 and turned around, he was gone, disappearing into the thick of the forest of trees, shrubs, and shadows. For a moment there, I shuddered a bit out of fear, but looking to my right, I saw the road and felt better, safer. But I was not safe. It was on. As I started my search for Jacob, and this time I would find him in record time and make him a bit jealous of the fact, I told myself. First I stopped, looked down at the ground, went silent, and listened to my surroundings. This was something my grandfather taught me to do. I was silent and listened closely to what seemed at least for a whole minute for sure. I finally heard movement to the northeast of me, and it sounded like someone moving through the brush. I followed the sound back into the forest. Is that you, Jacob? It happened so quickly. I found myself following the sounds of footsteps and movement so closely I got, turned around. I had no idea which way was which, not a few minutes later. There just wasn't enough snow inside of the trees, here and there, to find my footprints, from time to time at least. I decided to make a quick call out for my brother, not too loud, as I was afraid of some mountain lion or worse yet, a wolf to hear me sounding off like a dinner bell. I did call for him, loud enough, I believe, that if he were within earshot, he could hear me. Jacob? No answer, except for the sound of someone walking again through the trees and brush. I could not see who it was. The shadows and the tall brush obscured anything beyond about 10 yards or so. Not to mention, I was a kid, short and stout. A worry came over me, even as my grandfather's voice in my head was warning me suddenly to stop and listen again and stay calm. Yeah, right. I was in the middle of nowhere. Well, not nowhere. I was in the middle of a deep, dark Pacific forest, alone. Suddenly I heard, a voice. I could not make out what the words were, but it sounded like someone calling out, and maybe to me, from the southwest of me this time. I yelled back, but all I could hear was the footsteps again, as if someone were walking around just outside my line of sight. And again, a voice, but this time I heard it better, clearer than the last time. It was some weird-sounding gibberish, to be honest, and even weirder yet, it sounded like someone was trying to say my name but could not correctly pronounce it. I don't know what it was. It was just weird and a bit frightening, however. But, as any child might, I followed the sound even deeper into the woods, wondering if my brother perhaps was trying to scare me. That was it. I convinced myself the footsteps and voice were my brother's messing around yet again. But finally, after sensing my brother was nowhere around, I gave in to the truth about my situation not a minute later. I was lost. The woods were darker now, and that feeling of dread came over me suddenly. I finally realized I was not playing hide and seek with my older brother. I was lost, and something, and not my brother, led me deeper into the forest. I called out in desperation to my brother again, but this time the answer back was not Jacob at all. It was the deepest, most sinister sound I'd ever heard. Suddenly, footsteps came closer to me in the trees and brush, and whatever it was were being snapped and cracked. All the while, this thing made a scream that I heard only in my nightmares today. My body was saying, run. My mind, however, was saying, stay quiet, hunker down, over by the thick brush and don't move. I listened to that voice, the familiar voice I'd come to trust, my grandfather's voice in my head. I was so scared, I knew that the heavy footsteps that kept coming close were not that of my brother's. I also knew that I was not playing hide and seek with him either. And who, or whatever it was trying to get me confused, and I thought, trying to lead me deeper into the woods. That thought made me shiver as my bones became cold and frozen as the snow-covered ground around me. Again, whatever it was stopped walking and started in with the weirdest cackling, gargling sound I'd ever heard. And what was worse, it was not far away. I could hear it. It was even closer now. I never said a word. I did not give out an answer, and I think that thing knew that I knew that it was not my brother. It screamed again, even louder, so loud it hurt my ears, something horrible. I instinctively covered them as it screamed again, and although I was more scared than ever, I looked up and in the direction of the horrible, frightening screams. It's Bigfoot. There it stood, the massive, ugly monster it was. Dark cinnamon in color, and I mean dark, a dark, almost burnt-like cinnamon color of hair covered its entire body, except a bit around the eyes, nose, and what little mouth or lips were there. It was bent at the waist, and because so, its arms were so long that the back of its hands, its knuckles literally touched the ground. Its eyes seemed to be scanning, and as it tried to turn its head, its whole upper body had to turn as well to accomplish the feat. It started growling too, a deep rumble, kind of like what your stomach does when you're starving. But this was much louder, so loud you could almost feel it. I still sat there quietly listening, and trembling at what I was seeing before me. I stood. It stood a moment later, and this thing had to be at least 8 to 9 feet tall when fully erect, and it was built like Arnold Schwarzenegger was back then, except even bigger in the shoulders and, just bigger, period. Suddenly, my worst fear at that moment became real. As I mumbled a prayer under my lips that it would not see me, it smelled the air and briefly. Then, like a magnet to a metal pole, its head and upper torso immediately turned in my direction, looking right at me, as if it could see me through all the brush and shadow, as if they did not exist at all. I screamed as it moved towards me. Julie! I heard my name being called, and in confusion, I thought at first that it was the monster, that Bigfoot yelling out my name, and in a familiar voice, too. But it, too, stopped for a moment in confusion, it seemed. Julie! The voice yelled again. It's my grandfather's voice, the real and familiar voice. I screamed as loud as I could. I'm here, Grandpa, over here. I continued screaming the same words over and over as I sobbed at the same time. I looked up again through the tears of fear that fell down my face and saw nothing. No monster, no Bigfoot. It was gone. Julie and the Beast. Suffice it to say, I'm very skeptical about being out in the woods, even today with my own grandchildren, them being so young and all. That day my grandfather told me what I'd seen, and he told me other stories about Bigfoot and the legends surrounding it in the Pacific Northwest. And while I love the fact that I know they are real, to be honest, I would never relive that day again, given a choice. Never again do I want to see one of these things, and that's why hide and seek is only played at my house with the grandkids, and not on our camping trips or drives up to get a Christmas tree each year, even today. Julie.